Universidad del Valle de Guatemala. Excelencia que trasciende.
Douglas Duncan es autor de Clickers en el salón de clase, una guía de la nueva y poderosa tecnología que permite a los maestros saber qué es lo que todos los estudiantes están pensando y no solo aquellos que levantan la mano. Ha servido como coordinador de educación nacional para la Sociedad de Astronomía Americana, sociedad que representa a los 7.000 astrónomos profesionales en los Estados Unidos. En esa capacidad ha dirigido esfuerzos para un mejor sistema de enseñanza y comunicación pública. En 1992, Duncan se unió al grupo de astrónomos del telescopio espacial Hubble para organizar un encuentro nacional llamado Mujeres en Astronomía, para explorar por primera vez las razones por las cuales la mayoría de astrónomos son hombres y con la intención de incrementar las oportunidades para las mujeres. En 1992, cerca del 13% de los doctorados en astronomía eran mujeres. Hoy, esa figura excede el 30%. Ha sido autor de más de 50 publicaciones y su trabajo ha sido patrocinado por la Fundación Nacional de Ciencia, la NASA, el Instituto Smithsonian y la National Geographic Society. Trabaja regularmente con el grupo de la Universidad de Colorado, fundado por el ganador del Premio Nobel Carl Wieman y que investiga mejores maneras de enseñar ciencia. Duncan es también conocido por dirigir viajes educativos para observar eclipses de sol y auroras boreales. Su siguiente viaje en 2012 será hacia Australia para el eclipse total de sol. Todas las presentaciones, videos y documentos que sean presentados aquí van a estar disponibles en el sitio del Dr. Duncan a partir de la otra semana. Recibamos entonces al Dr. Douglas Duncan.
Muchas gracias. So, why do so many people believe rumors and false stories about 2012 and other topics? I think because of the way we teach them. How many of you teach? Muy bien. So for you, I have a challenge to do what follows. Today, in 2012, what does it mean to be educated? In the past, educated meant that you knew how to find information, for example, biblioteca, and you kept a lot in your head. But today, it's different. Information pours onto you. For example, a cell phone has 1 million times the memory that the Hubble Space Telescope had when it was launched. Incredible, no? So I think today, educated means being able to evaluate what is useful and correct. And that's the skill that we must teach to all students today. And this is especially true of science because science affects your life and my life in so many ways. If I get sick, what medicine should I choose? Is global warming a serious problem? Can I believe advertisements that I see on television or the internet? At the University of Colorado, we have 40 faculty and students researching the best ways of teaching science. And I am pleased I will show you ways to teach that we have proven are effective. But first, I will show you what not to do. Now, many of us have been teaching the same way for a long time. This room would be very familiar to a Greek. But how much do our students learn when we teach them this way? Let me tell you a story. We have a Nobel Prize winner who teaches about physics you see in everyday life. Despite being a Nobel Prize winner, he is a very good teacher. And in one class, he explained how a violin works. He said, the strings do not move very much air. A violin has a wooden body that vibrates and moves much more air, and that is what makes the sound that you hear. 15 minutes later, in the same class, he stopped and asked the students, where does the sound come from in a violin? And he gave them choices. A, mostly the strings. B, mostly the wooden body. C, both equally. Or D, none of the above. Now, I have a question for you. How many of the students gave the correct answer, do you think? This is the first of several times I will ask you to vote. Okay? How do we vote? It's very simple. Take your paper and fold it into 4 parts. I guess fold it twice. Once this way, and also once this way. And so if I want to vote A, 1, 2, 3, A. If I want B, B. You can probably guess the rest. C, D, Carol, E. Okay? So, now you can vote. Remember, 0% of the students, B 10%, 30%, pessimist, optimist. Okay? So, 1, 2, 3, vota. Interessante. Muchos de algunas say, they, no, bueno, uno, only 10% of the students gave the correct answer. And remember, this was 15 minutes after he taught them. Now, this is actually a difficult question because most children learn that vibrating strings make sound. And if something is in your brain for many years, just hearing something different is often not enough to change thinking. So the idea that this is the traditional model of education, you are the teacher, your student's brain is empty, your job is to fill it. This is not correct, not true. Teaching by telling is surprisingly poor if your goal, if you want your students to master concepts. Students must do thinking, not just listening. So what should you do when you're teaching? Discussion and practice of the students, even in class and sometimes in groups, is a good thing. Let's make an example. I'm going to give you one question which I got wrong. It's a question just to make us all equal in biology. So, a question. Consider a tiny seed. This seed grows to be a big tree. After a long time, the tree dies and is cut up into pieces, into logs. And one old, dead, dry log from this tree weighs 10,000 times as much as the seed. My question is, where does most of the mass of this old, dead, dry log come from? You have 4 choices, and the way I want you to answer is very specific. Primera respuesta por ti mismo, más adelante se puede hablar. Okay? So, listo?
How do you vote for E?
Ah, you were not listening. Me. Okay. Okay. 1, 2, 3, vota. Interessante. Almost equal. A, B, C, D, A. So, most of you are not correct. A majority. So what to do? Now, this is what our research shows the teacher should do. ¿Cómo hacer que cada persona participar? Hablar con la gente cerca de ti. A la izquierda, derecha, pero primero, a hint. Do you remember photosynthesis? Try and remember, what does a plant breathe in? What does a plant breathe out? And so, what must stay in the plant? Okay? A la izquierda, derecho, hablar, 2 minutos. Hablar. A majority of you are now voting E, perhaps 50 or 60% of you. Maybe 20% are voting D, and 10 or 20% are voting the other. Congratulations. The correct answer, remarkably, is the air. Isn't that amazing? That giant log, and a little over 50% of it came from the air. But that is not my point. Of course, I'm not trying to teach you how to grow a tree. I'm trying to teach you a different way of behaving with your students. Notice the excitement. You all were talking a lot. I was trying to listen. You talk during the class, you learn more. And I didn't write this, but if you do this with your students, let them talk in a group and figure out the answer themselves when you give them an exam or a quiz. 1 week or 2 weeks later, they remember significantly more. So, we need to be careful in teaching not to just teach memorization. For example, when was Tikal built? That is the lowest level of thinking. You can answer it with memorizing. More complex, how do we know when Tikal was built? Even more complex, something which requires evaluation. So, how do we teach our students to think more critically and more scientifically, especially if you want them to do this outside of class for the rest of their life, for instance? Then have them practice outside of class. We have the internet, we have YouTube, go and use them. Here is how I do this. Number one, I talk about what science is with the students. Number two, about every other week, I give a good science versus bad science assignment. Bad science or fake science is often called pseudoscience. So the students must go to the web or to YouTube. They see 2 sites or videos. One is good science, one is bad. Then they must discuss with the other students how they decide. Now, a lot of them think science is a bunch of answers. Not true. A lot of them think scientists look a certain way. Thank you, Hollywood. Not true. So I talk with them. What is science? I emphasize that science is a process, trying to understand the world by making theories which have predictive power. And that's very important. They usually know that science involves observing. We look for patterns. Maybe we classify things, we measure things. But then we suggest an explanation or a hypothesis which explains all the observations made so far and predicts new ones. Then we can make an experiment which tests the prediction. And then, of course, sadly, if the experiment fails, we must suggest another hypothesis. And we tell others what we've discovered. But I really like this quote by the great physicist Richard Feynman. Science is a way of trying not to fool yourself. I expand that slightly, or be fooled by others. This is a very good thing to do because it motivates students. Students, just like you and me, do not like to be fooled. So if you convince them that science is valuable in this way, they put more effort into learning it. I think it's important to be honest. Science is not the only way of trying to understand the world. Others include philosophy, religion, logic, intuition, but science is a particular method. And if it doesn't follow the process of science that we just talked about, then it isn't science. And it is a powerful guard against being fooled. So just as one little example, so-called creation science is not science. We do not experiment with creation. At least I don't. Okay, so does it really help not to have you not be fooled. How easy do you think you are to fool? Let me give you one question I use with my students. A lot of my students have a car, so I ask them, which vehicle is safer to drive? Safest of the three, A, B, or C? What do you think? So the top one is A, second is B, third is C. I'll be more specific when needed. All right? So just for fun, let's vote. Uno, dos, tres, vota. Very good. 50%, no, 49% A, 49% B, and 2% C. So if you look, indeed, the Camry is the safest in units of deaths per million miles, per million vehicles, excuse me. The big pickup truck is the least safe, but the good news is if someone dies, it's more likely to be the other person. But you're less safe, okay? And the point of this is you can't just look. Science is based on data, which is not the same as personal opinion, no matter how smart you are. My university students think they're pretty smart, but a lot of them get it wrong, okay? So now let's talk about using the internet and the World Wide Web, where my students spend most of their time anyway. Let's have a little activity. I'll give you maybe 3 minutos. Why don't you turn to the people near you and come up with some suggestions. What are good things to look for if you're trying to find good science on the web? Go ahead and have a quick little discussion. What should you look for in a website? So let's take a few suggestions. If you prefer to give the suggestions in Spanish to help my comprehension, Eduardo has volunteered to translate if needed. So let's take some suggestions. What is good to look for? Someone in the back may start.
The academic studies of the author of the page.
Okay. So the suggestion is the background of the author, if it's given, right? Other suggestions?
The sources.
The sources, okay, if they're given.
If you like, this is depends like, well, when I say about reference, like research, it's almost about reference, like we have to find reference, and she say it's almost about she starts like a PDF, and if it's not pretty good, it doesn't cross it out.
Okay, could you hear that in the back?
No.
Her suggestion was references should be clear. Somewhat similar to sources. Sources and references should be clear. Other suggestion? Yes?
Grammar and spelling.
Oh, okay. If someone looks good, that's a good sign. Maybe. My students say that. And usually, often it's true. Often. Yes, one more. Peer review. My university students, only 5 or 10% of them have ever heard of peer review. So we teach them what it is. They can publish anytime they want on the internet. We have to go through peer review, so teach them what that is. Okay? This is the list that my students came up with over the period of a month. Okay? So 2 every other week. Do this, talk to their friends, and the synthesis of all the student opinion is much better than each one individually. So they help each other a lot. I don't think I'll read all of these, but you already made a number of suggestions. References, peer review, should be logical. Facts, data, not just opinion. That's important. Contrary information given. What is not known is identified. Good science does that. Pseudoscience never does that. And finally, if a claim is extraordinary, it demands extraordinarily strong evidence. We kind of like that one. How about bad science? Of course, I have my students have similar discussions about bad or pseudoscience. Here's what they came up with. Quite important. Pseudoscience explains something after it happens. That's what we do most of the time in everyday life. Very important, so I made it bold. It explains things people care about, typically health, love, the future, that may not have an explanation. It avoids the scientific response, we don't know. We don't have enough data. It loves to use scientific sounding language, but uses it wrong, incorrectly. Loves words like energy, cosmic, quantum. Does not use the scientific method of stating clearly something that you test. Now it has an explanation even when the idea fails. You know, if you're a faith healer, a pseudoscientific healer, and your patient dies, they almost never complain. If it contradicts known science, then the originator of the theory claims to be persecuted by the rest of the scientists, and is not recognized because he or she is so far ahead. Einstein was wrong, Galileo was wrong, Kepler was wrong, I'm right. You recognize this pattern? It's the same in every country. Some people shove me very nicely. It happens right here. You recognize the pattern. Your students are not in the habit of doing this unless you give them practice. They're in the habit that if their friend says, I saw it, that is very persuasive to them, to college students. Usually more than a scientific article. So you have to talk about how reliable is what your friend saw. Let's do an experiment. Some of you have done this experiment with me in the workshop. I ask you to please be silent. Everyone else can take part in the experiment. Please watch this short video. There are 6 college students, 3 wear white clothes, 3 wear black, and they are passing basketballs back and forth. I want you to count. Cuenta los pasos de la pelota desde el blanco al blanco. No cuente blanco al negro al blanco, o al negro con negro. ¿Claro? Okay. Y silencio. No, 1, 2, 3. Okay? So let's start this wonderful little video. Ready? Go. Okay. ¿Cuántos? 16. 17. One person thinks they got up to 18. Okay. Well, I have a different question for you, okay? Here's my question. How many of you saw a big black gorilla? How many of you did not see a big black gorilla? Okay, 40% of you are going to be quite surprised. Let's play this again. And I would like the 40% of you who did not see a big, hairy, black gorilla approximately my size. 40% of you did not see that gorilla. This video is very, very effective convincing my students that what my friend saw or what my friend said is not scientific evidence. It also helps explain why a scientific theory must be tested by many scientists, many different scientists who see the same thing before it's accepted. This is not what most people think a theory is, and the difference with a scientific theory is important for you to explain. I also make a big point that science matters. Some parents in America today think vaccines cause autism and should not be used, should be abolished. So I talk about what is polio. Most college students have not experienced it. I convince students that it's more fun not to be fooled than to be fooled. Okay? Let's talk for a minute about astrology, because I am an astronomer. They ask me at parties, what is my sign? Sometimes I say dollar, and they go away. But it is wrong to say astrology doesn't work. It does with professional astrologers, but it depends on psychology. Watch a very good person in action.
Do you think astrologists, palm readers and the like can really tell everything about you? That your personality can be read from your birth date, your hand, or from sensing vibrations? Very possible. As ever, the volunteers here had no idea of what we're about to do. I'm going to ask each of you to take a sheet of paper and to draw around your hand on the paper. That's what pens are for. When you've done that, to write on the paper your birth date, and if you know the time of birth as well, it'll be very useful. And thirdly, to take some personal object that you have on you. Please don't choose anything that is immediately recognisable as being yours. You're going to put them into one of the numbered envelopes. It does not matter which one. Does that kind of make sense to you all? Right, okay, I will look the other way. If you can do that for me now, that would be great. Any bit of paper, obviously, any pen, any envelope. You put your birth date on the paper, into any envelope you like, along with some personal item, please. All done? Can I get somebody just to mix up all the envelopes and hang on to them so that person has all 5 envelopes as well? Remember your numbers, please, because that's the only way you're going to be able to identify the correct envelope later on. And I will come round now and talk to you. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so each envelope has a drawing of a hand and a birth date and a little object. I will take these envelopes away and I will try and write a description of the personalities of the owners of those things. Okay?
Cada sobre tiene un papel con su objeto personal y en el papel está una mano trazada y su fecha de nacimiento. Él se va a llevar los sobres y de acuerdo con lo que él vea dentro de los sobres pues va a hacer una descripción de su personalidad.
While I go and do this, we've got a place for you to sit down, we've got some refreshments there, some tea and coffee, paella, and I will come back in and see how it goes. Probably take that now to do this, and I will try and be accurate. I'm not going to be general, I'm going to try and be very specific about things, so bear with me and I'll see you in a bit. Okay? Right, cheers. Hello, I'm finished. So, if you can each take your envelope, you can put me your numbers. We're going to go away and read this now. I don't want you being able to read each other's though. It's very important you kind of only focus on your own one. Really try and spread yourselves out around the room so you're not able to see each other's. And then we're going to ask you individually what you think. So, go to that. See you in a bit. Thank you.
I was very overwhelmed when I read the analysis. Darren mentioned that, of course, I'm very self-critical, so reading this sort of thing was very difficult for me anyway. It's unbelievable. I can't believe how accurate it is.
I kept reading to the paper and saying, I can't believe he's analysed me so accurately.
It does feel actually so personal, it's actually quite hard for me to share.
Help yourselves.
I feel like it pretty much summed up who I am. Part about self-examination, which was in the first sentence on the page. I feel like, oh yeah, that's me.
It's kind of astounding. I've always believed in something like it. This just kind of confirms it, but it also shocks me because I didn't think it would work so well.
It's true, honestly, it's true. I don't get stuff done because I don't like the idea of mediocrity, and that's so true. That's the guy here. The heck? It's so weird.
It was shocking when it happened. Very likely this will lead you to having considered writing a novel, but the fear that you won't be able to achieve what you want stops you from getting it done. And I actually started writing a novel when I was 17 and had written several chapters but didn't finish it because, I don't know.
Ha visto cosas que ni siquiera yo había visto de mí misma.
Nunca había hecho antes algo como esto. Y pensé que iba a ser un poco más general, un poco más vago, un poco más tipo horóscopo y tal. Y realmente va a cosas profundas de mi personalidad, ¿no?
Le daría el 75%, pero el 25% no importa porque el 75% ha sido tan exacto y tan personal.
Un 80%, pues que hay cosas que están clavadas, que es perfecto.
90% puede ser.
I would give it the reading a 95% accuracy rating.
85%.
Like 40%.
85%.
90%. 99%. Definitely.
Okay. I want to try something else. First of all, if you can all take your readings out of your envelopes, just hold on to the phone. Just the readings, not the hands and so on. Thank you very much. This may sound a bit funny for some of you, but don't worry about it. Can you just mix them up and pass them around so you don't know whose you've ended up with? What I'm going to ask you to do in a moment is to have a look through the reading that you now have in your hand and see if you can identify the person that it belongs to. If you open this up now, just have a look. If you've got the same one again, just mix them up again and take someone else's. Reading. Yeah, they're all exactly the same.
La criatura personas todos son exactamente
They're all exactly the same. Please don't feel stupid. This is a skill, it's something called cold reading. It's a technique used by people who claim to be psychic, people who claim to talk to the dead. It's as old as the hills. And if you think for a moment actually of how even more effective it would be if I was a psychic working one-on-one with you.
Él escribió esto hace varios meses atrás.
And we've given these to people in America, and we've given them to people in England, and it's always the same.
I'll stop the last minute or two of that recording, but seeing college students like themselves, it has a very high impact. Of course, psychics and fortune tellers work the same way, by reading people. I have a bunch of instructions how to become a successful fortune teller. Some of the things I've taught today I have printed out, and you're welcome to come to the front in a couple of minutes when I finish and take copies. I don't really want to take them home. Remember the characteristics of pseudoscience. Always give an answer. Never say we don't have enough data, and people will give you money for it. I come from the university where two students went out and created a cartoon called South Park. I have a 1-minute recording from South Park, what they think about the most famous current psychic in America, a man named John Edward, who makes $5 million a year doing this. But here's what South Park says.
Hey, I need to ask you a big favor. You did a reading of my best friend, and we kind of messed him up.
Ooh. The John Edward Show is not liable for opinions and materials given for entertainment purposes only.
Look, my friend Kyle won't fly back home to Colorado. All I need you to do is just talk to him and tell him, the whole talking to dead people isn't for real.
Maybe it is for real.
Right, but it's not. It's a trick you do, and I need you to just let my friend Kyle know that so he can go on with his life.
Look, people have the right to be skeptical. I really hear voices in my head.
Yes, we all hear voices in our heads. It's called intuition. Get over yourself and tell my friend it's just for fun.
Look, what I do doesn't hurt anybody. I give people closure and help them cope with life.
No, you give them false hope and a belief in something that isn't real.
But I'm a psychic.
No, dude, you're a douche.
I'm not a douche. What if I really believe dead people talk to me?
Then you're a stupid douche.
I think I've had enough of your bullying me. Get out of my house or I'll run upstairs, lock myself in my panic room and call the police.
I'm 9 years old.
I'm not talking to your friend and I'm not a douche. Get out of my house now and call the police.
Gee, we put the subtitles on there. I don't know why they didn't work. If you want a copy, you can have a copy later. Another assignment I give, an article from the BBC investigates people who think they were visited by aliens, and it concludes they really believe aliens came to them. They're not lying. However, there's no evidence their belief is true. And readers left their comments. Many said, I always wondered about this, thank you for investigating. But some said, scientists have no business saying someone's personal beliefs may not be true. So what do you think? Do you think scientists should or should not? Do you agree scientists should say that there's no evidence? People who believe something strongly, like this, may still be mistaken. Or do you agree with the one person who wrote and said every person is entitled to their own opinions? Scientists have no business challenging them. Let's vote. 1, 2, 3, ustedes voten. Okay. That's good. I didn't let you read the article. I understand that. But I summarized what it said. A majority of students usually say scientists should talk about things, but a substantial number say everyone's entitled to their own opinion. Then on the following assignment, I make it more personal. Suppose you were on a jury and a woman testified in court that during therapy she remembered being molested as a child. Her testimony included many vivid details, but there was no other evidence. Would you vote on the jury to send her father to prison? And I have my students vote. And they squirm a little bit, and they vote. And then I ask them, did the class discussions of science as a way of trying not to fool yourself how science must be based on evidence, or the article you read before on alien abductions affect how you voted? And for a significant number, they say yes. They've changed how they think about evidence. So I continually stress that science matters. I point out that for all of human history, until the advent of science, life expectancy was about 40 years, and now it's approximately doubled. So what happens if you give these extra exercise to students? Well, we have a paper published on this, and what it shows is that students in this test class with the extra assignments say that anybody can do science or think scientifically or get good science information if they try. They also say that they are much less likely to be fooled than before they took the class. Students in a regular class, a comparison class, were more likely to say that you must be scientific to do science. And of course they're wrong. Most people do science every day, many people anyway. If your computer breaks, you make a hypothesis what is wrong, you test it. You're cooking, you change the ingredients, you make an experiment, right? So the result of this is to bring science to the average student and make it less scary, less esoteric, and less particular. Our students can learn to make good scientific decisions, whether they are scientific majors or not, if we give them the right practice. Thank you very much. Preguntas. Sure. You may go first.
Well, it's more than a question.
Okay.
The thing is that I see that the science concept that you explained to us is the Occidental science. Because I see that all other civilizations have science, and in their science they combine it with religion. And we see it, for example, in the codexes, that they could, for example, calculate movements of planets and everything.
Right.
And then they combine it with the proper days for ceremonies, for mating, for everything. So for me, science has different ways of being made.
Yes. So I'm trying, let me find the list. So I think what you've said actually repeats many of the things which I have tried to carefully define as science. Western science, yes, but there's the observing, there's measuring, There's predicting. I guess I would say, though, that it's the heart of science, as we know it, to go ahead and test the prediction. So you predict there's going to be an eclipse at a certain time. Then you have to see if the eclipse really happens. And if it doesn't, then you have to change your idea. And the willingness to change your idea is the heart of what has allowed science to advance, right? Because for all of that period of time, we used to do a lot of things, shall we say, which are dangerous, which don't work. You know, people used to have a headache, and they used to chisel a hole in their head of trepanation. And the only reason we gave that up was when there were enough experiments of doing it and not doing it to know that it didn't help. So I guess the one thing I would point out as being very important is in science as I define it, you have to be willing to change your picture of the world if your idea fails to turn out when you look, when you experiment. So I do think that's very important. But I also agree with you that many of the elements of science here are practiced by many people and were sometime in the past. See someone in the back? Yes?
Unfortunately, you chose that example. You said we did the interpretation.
Yes?
No, interpretation still has a surgical reason. If you fall, you bump your head, and there is a hemorrhage inside your brain, right. Interpretation will save your life. So
I guess
we have not finished doing interpretations.
Good point. I should have been less general. We finished doing trepanation for the average head. Okay, any? Yes?
Look, I think you are teaching to the university, but I think you need to teach more earlier age. I mean,
sure.
Primary school or...
I think it's a very good point. Could you hear him in the back? I happen to have an appointment at a university, but I have had, ever since the paper was published, maybe last year, I've had 10 or 15 people start using these materials. They're all free on the web, and a number of them teach younger students. I mean, younger students go to the web, and they go to YouTube all the time also, and they're faced with the same kind of choice. You know, what information do I believe, what do I not? So I agree 100%, you could do this and should do this much earlier. Very, last question.
Popular interpretation about the Zodiac calendar, about the personal path. Like, yes, there's a popular, I don't know.
Yes, what is the question about?
Like, what's your point of view about how is it popular interpretation about the Zodiac calendar, about the personal pattern, about how your life is ruled? Like, it's very popular in Guatemala,
right.
like people, you just wonder. Like,
Well,
you speak a little bit about psychics and a little bit about horoscope, and I wonder how is your approach, because it's a cultural phenomenon.
That video of the person practicing astrology, if you asked those students, did the astrology work, they would have told you yes. Isn't that right? The only reason they don't is that the astrologer came forward at the end and said, now I tell you how I did it. I have other videos which show exactly the same thing with psychics. You know, they
My
work.
question is more specific about this calendar and the interpretation we have in Guatemala with a lot of people. Yeah, it's about like this mystical view, but it's not so mystical, it's just a cultural phenomenon about the interpretation of your personal path. And I wonder what's your opinion about
You know, because I don't have particular local knowledge, I shouldn't give an opinion. I'll just refer you back to what I said quickly in the beginning, that this same pattern of people wanting to know about love, people wanting to know about the future, people wanting to know about health, is seen in every single country that's been studied. And in every country that I'm familiar with, there are people, and this is why I make a point of doing this, that take advantage of other people by taking their money and giving them answers
it's
like
very
this.
obvious, yeah.
But
very specific. It's a matter, I guess, if people here are interested in the standard, not just in a way of their quality, but also in the meaning, the meaning, like it has a I don't know.
Well, all I can tell you is what my students reported to me. After they saw how the astrologer worked, after they read this article on the stage here, How to Become a Successful Psychic, after they studied these other examples, what they said to me, and of course, I don't have the resources to follow them around, so I can only believe what they said. But what they said is they changed their attitude to want more evidence. They've changed their attitude about how important psychology is. You know, I'm not saying that people don't believe it. I'm saying only that some of us...
Universidad del Valle de Guatemala. Visita nuestra página web www.vg.edu.gt.